This is the second video in our series on VegMachine forage reports. Previously we looked at how to create a report, and this video will show you the basics of interpreting it. Your report will arrive by email as a PDF document. The number of pages varies, but the layout of every report includes 3 sections. The front 4 pages are user help. They tell you how to read and interpret the second section, the Paddock Pages. In this section, there is a single page for each paddock you selected to be in the report. And the final section is the summary table, a simple tool for comparing different parts of our property side by side. Let's look at each section now. This is the first section of the report, user help. You can see it includes a labelled map of our paddocks. There is also 3 written pages of help here. I'll cover most of that material in this video, but this is worth reading at least once to give yourself a good background. As I said earlier, the second section is comprised of your paddock pages. Each page summarises a single paddock, and these pages include 2 maps at the top and up to 3 graphs at the bottom. I'll talk about the maps first and then circle back to the graphs. The maps include a region map on the left and the paddock map on the right. The paddock map will highlight the paddock that is the focus of this page. In this case, it's Roger's paddock, and you can see it's 327 hectares. These colours indicate the major land types in the paddock, and they are the same ones that are mapped over here in the region map and identified down here in the legend. Roger's paddock is also visible in the region map. You can probably just make it out here, highlighted among all the other paddocks of our property. We're using the term region here in a very specific sense. To define the region, VegMachine puts a preset radius around the center of our property, so the region itself is the area between the radius and the boundary of our property. The region doesn't include any part of our property. Okay, let's look at those graphs now. This particular page has 3 graphs, but sometimes there can be less. When this happens, it's because the number of graphs corresponds to the number of land types in the legend. You'll note too that each graph has a coloured bar along the top. The colours correspond to the land types identified in the mapping to help you quickly relate the graph to the corresponding land type. Looking more closely at the graph for Goldfields country now, on the horizontal axis runs time from 1990 to the present, and on the vertical axis is ground cover from 0 to 100%. The main line running through the graph, this one marked by the symbols, shows us average cover in our land type within the paddock. So here in summer 1995, for example, the line sits at about 70%. This means that in summer 1995, the average cover in the Goldfields country of Roger's paddock was about 70%, whereas in autumn 2000, it was much higher, about 98%. Behind that line, you also see some fainter grey bands. These show how cover varies in the surrounding regions. You'll see an upper and lower grey band and a thin line between them. Now I'm going to talk about percentiles here for a moment. If you don't follow, don't worry. Just skip forward 30 seconds to where I explain the graph symbols. It's the same stuff. The top of the upper grey band is the 95th percentile of cover for the region. So at any point in time, only 5% of the region has ground cover above this level. The bottom of the upper grey band is the 80th percentile of cover for the region, so 20% of the region has cover above this level at any point in time. This thin line between the 2 grey bands is the 50th percentile, so half of the region has more than this level of cover at any point in time, and half has less. And the bottom grey band is much like the top one, except it marks the 20th and 5th percentiles of regional cover. If you're looking for the short version here, focus on these symbols. They allow you to quickly compare your paddock with the region, and it works like this. If the cover in our paddock at some point falls above the upper grey band, VegMachine adds one of these dark blue triangles. This just means that the average cover in this land type in our paddock is well above levels expected for the region. If the line falls inside the upper grey band, we call it above expected levels of cover, and it's tagged with a light blue triangle. If it falls between the 2 grey bands, we call it similar to the expected level of cover because it's around the mid-range for the region, and it's assigned a white circle. If average cover in our paddock falls into the lower grey band, it gets an orange diamond, which means cover is below expected levels compared to the region. And finally, if cover in our paddock falls below the lower grade band, it's defined as well below expected levels of cover, and we mark it with a red diamond. Once you understand the symbols, reading the graphs is easy. The two keys here are to focus on longer term trends rather than short term fluctuations, and to relate what you see to our management history. So for example, is cover consistently high or consistently low? Is the same pattern visible across different land types in the same paddock? Are there trends over time, say from lower to higher levels of cover? And how do all of these relate to the way we've managed those areas in terms of stock numbers and distribution, or the introduction of new infrastructure like waters? There's going to be another video in the near future with more about interpreting these graphs, but for now that wraps up the graph pages, and we'll move to the final section of our VegMachine Forage report, the summary table. The summary table is a simple table at the end of your report. It's preceded by a one-page explainer that gives us the basics about the table, but essentially it's a tool to help us compare each part of the property in a simple side-by-side analysis. If we look at the table itself, it has a row for each graph in the report. The top row, for example, summarises the graph for the goldfields land type in arsenic paddock. And to help us out, I'm going to bring up that graph on the screen too. The next 6 columns are all numbers. These 2 columns summarise the full period of the graph. These 2 summarise the final 10 years. And these 2 the final 5 years. In each pair of columns, you can see we have measures called ground cover and P20. The ground cover values are simply average ground cover over a given period. So average ground cover in the goldfields land type of arsenic paddock over the full period is 81%, whereas for the last 5 years it's 79%. By comparison, the P20 values are the percent of cover measurements in our paddock below or well below expected levels of cover over a given period. In other words, it's the percentage of symbols that are red or orange diamonds. So over the full period, 30% of these values are diamonds. Over the last 10 years, 34% are diamonds. And in the last 5 years, this has increased again to 39%. Of these 2 measurements, P20 is the more informative. In the arsenic example, we saw average cover stayed fairly stable over time, but this didn't take rainfall into account. By comparison, P20 values compare paddock cover with regional cover, and since the region has much the same rainfall history as the paddock, any differences are more likely to be about management than rainfall. This can give us some important insights into where and how our management is affecting our biggest resource, our grazing land. One final thought on the summary table is to run your finger down those P20 columns and highlight the bigger values. Once you have, ask yourself if you see any patterns. Are they all in one land type? Are they changing in number or size over time? How do they relate to your broader management of your property? There may be some insights here that can assist our decision making. So that's a quick rundown on how to read a VegMachine Forage report. In the near future, we'll put up another video with more detail about the interpretation of these reports. In the meantime, if you have any questions, you can message us via the Facebook page or the help page on the website, and also feel free to suggest a topic for future videos.